contributions to country music, but there are some. There's, of course, the legendary Kinky Friedman, and of course, now the Joe Buchanan. There have been a lot, and we really didn't talk that much about Jewish contribution to film scores and to that because I think we're going to touch on that a little bit. Though we did talk about Irving Berlin, and we talked about Rogers and Hart, and then Rogers and Hammerstein. We talked a little bit about the Broadway music that then made it obviously to adaptations that were very big. But of course, there's Jewish songwriters and composers for movies, especially people like the the Newman family and uh, yeah, there were a lot of people we didn't talk because we really did focus on pop and a little bit because we're going to talk about some of the Jewish music people today who were pretty much just the Hollywood people. Though again, Irving Berlin definitely crosses over because some of his stuff went directly. And of course, we talked about it, and I really want to kind of talk about at the beginning the fact that, one of the biggest uh, while we talked about it within the context of music, obviously the jazz singer, right? The jazz singer was both a testament to music and filmmaking, and of course was the first major movie that had synchronized sound to the film. So there's definitely a piece of that, but you're right, Alan. We definitely focused more on popular music that had a cultural influence and how that resonates. So it's a good point to make. Of course, some of the biggest soloists that people have followed on stage over the years, whether it's Yitzhak Perlman or Yasha Heifetz. There were several really very important Jewish soloists who had national, international followings and were major draws. So it's a good thing to remind us of. And as we go into film and television today, you know, as much as we talked about Jewish contributions to music, American music in particular, that we talked last week about, especially Israeli music, and we are going to talk about Israeli film and television today too, because it's now had a major impact on American worldwide cinema and especially television. But look, to say, and you can see the image we have up here of Neil Gabler's An Empire of Their Own. If you want the classic text on how Jews invented Hollywood, and that's the subtitle, there is no question that the Jewish people invented Hollywood, created Hollywood. So rather than go through every Jewish filmmaker, studio head, actor, and just give a litany of actors, and I'm sure if I did that too, I'd wind up forgetting some of the most important ones, and I would, probably uh, lean too heavily on the popular, film and not necessarily art film and documentary and several other genres that are important but aren't as popular. But we're not going to do that. I mean, there's certain stuff we have to say, and we will say it. But obviously, there's got to be something here. What I'm trying to do here is every session, not just to state the obvious, but to kind of find something that we can lean into. That's a new way of looking at this, not just to say there's a lot of Jews in these media forms. It's to say what's the story here? What's the lesson here? What's the thing that you may not have thought about? So, look, let's talk a little bit about that. But really, I mean, the Jews inventing Hollywood. But let's also keep in mind that there's a story here that's bigger than the Jews invented Hollywood. And that is over the next couple of sessions, and I have it scheduled for two, but as John pointed out, maybe it will be in three or four. There's another story here, which is how did Jews who created Hollywood, let's not, we'll we'll establish that a little bit, like I said, but how did they establish a Hollywood that initially almost went out of its way to an extreme of representing Jewish stories to what we have today, which is a Jewish community in Hollywood and again, working in film and television that has in some ways embraced Jewish storytelling and is more comfortable than ever in being very Jewish, sometimes uncomfortably Jewish. So, how did we get to MGM and Warner, who very rarely depicted anything Jewish on screen, to Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm? How do we get from that point in the 1920s to where we are in the 2020s? That's the story. How do we get from there to there? So let's do it. Let's tell that story. How did Jewish immigrants and the next generation and the next generation, we're in about the third or fourth generation of that, happen? Now, first, I do want to tell you something that you probably, well, if you know it, you may not think about it, and you may not know it at all. And that is, Jews were already doing stage and film and experimenting with new media forms before they came to Hollywood. It was very, very important for us to recognize that in especially in New York, but it went on in Chicago and Philadelphia and other cities around America, there was a flourishing Yiddish theater in this country where Jews told stories, again, primarily in Yiddish, but they told stories that were um, told in their language, in our language, Yiddish, but the people who were working in that environment, some of them made amazing transitions into film and onto the stage and into music because they were steeped in an acting tradition. And I'm going to tell you that it's not talked about a lot, um, that transition. But it wasn't like Jews all of a sudden came to Hollywood and said, "Hey, here we are. We're going to make movies," or "Here I am. I'm going to be an actor." So some of the people that were big stars. I mean, in the Jewish community, these were people who had huge followings. They were written about in the Yiddish newspapers. They had groupies. They had people who loved them. One of the biggest was Jacob Adler, who was an actor uh, of an amazing magnitude in the turn of the century, the last century, in the 1900s. He was huge. One of the others was Boris Tomaszewski, whose grandson became one of the biggest conductors of actually conducted the LA Philharmonic for many years. Tilson Thomas, shortened the name from Tomaszewski. Sophie Tucker, who we mentioned, was a big star in vaudeville after she was um, a Yiddish star. Again, 100, we're talking about 100 years ago. And of course, Irving Berlin, who started off writing music in the Yiddish theater as well, and writing in Yiddish because he was born in what was the Russian Empire in 1880s. Now, these people, some of them, again, kind of the ones who were in the 1920s, not the first wave of the late 1800s, very early 1900s, but some of those people who were um, who were actors on the Yiddish stage ended up having also some pretty big transition, if they were young enough, into Hollywood, into the movies. And one of those, again, was this guy right here, Paul Mooney. Paul Mooney, who was born in the old country, came to the United States as a young boy, and became, during his time in the 1920s and 30s, the biggest actor in Hollywood. He was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, won an Academy Award for The Story of Louis Pasteur, won an Academy Award, but was also nominated for an Academy Award, literally the second Oscars, but was also known. This is the role that he kind of made iconic, which is the original Scarface. He was the biggest actor, period. I mean, like hands down, the actor that he was the Matt Damon of his day. I mean, he made movies by him being in the movie. And so these actors were already established uh, either by Yiddish stage, by vaudeville, and then again, if they were young enough to make the transition to film, they ended up having careers in Hollywood. What was interesting is that the people who would develop and become, in Gabler's words, the people who created Hollywood, those people, many of them actually didn't have Yiddish theater or acting experience. They were not necessarily even in media before. They kind of saw film as an opportunity, as a way to make money in a new field, in an area where maybe there's opportunities for people who are kind of outsiders. So I'm going to do this in a fairly quick way, but again, read Neil Gabler's An Empire of Their Own if you want to read the full story. But these are the guys. And they were all guys. These were the people who founded literally almost every studio in Hollywood. Every one of them almost was an immigrant. Every one of them started out almost with nothing. Almost every one of them started in some other kind of business before they made their way into Hollywood. The people and the institutions that they created. And by the way, obviously, in the last year, we've had a lot of these institutions change hands and merge. But how many businesses is a company that was started over 100 years ago still even around? Again, I know it's not the same company. It's part of another company. But the fact that they even keep the name, the fact that these studios still carry power is amazing for any kind of company. So you have Dolph Zucker, who started Paramount Pictures. Again, what did he do? He not only created Paramount, but he helped basically create the studio system, right? Where companies not only made films, but produced them, but also distributed them. Carl Laemmle, born in the old country, uh, he started Universal Pictures and developed what became Universal Studios. Bought a farm on Cahuenga for his studio and turned it into what many of us drive by almost all the time off the 101, 170 junction. What is a, a, a literally the lifeblood of media in so many ways. Carl Laemmle, by the way, and the name is pronounced Laemmle. His cousins, Max and Kurt, are the ones who started the Laemmle theaters. So it wasn't Carl, but his family who started those theaters. They're still the Laemmle theaters. There's still 7 of them. We had a chance to meet Greg Laemmle, who's the 3rd generation to own the theaters. He came out here to Newhall when the movie about his company, the Laemmle Theaters, only in the theaters, came out. He actually came out and spoke about the movie for a little bit when we did a screening of that through the temple. Greg came out. It was very hard for them to survive COVID. They did. They lost some theaters, but they kept 7 of them. The one that was really hard was ours because it opened up during COVID and was delayed because of COVID. Um, but Greg has kept the company together. The movie was a good movie. It was kind of like a story of a family owning a theater. His father, Bob, who was actually alive when the movie was made, just passed away last year. His grandfather, Max, is the one who helped start the theaters. So, um, this is a family where not just Carl was in the movies, and his son Carl Jr. ended up inheriting the Universal Pictures and making movies, but the cousins, the family, the greater family was involved as well. Fox, William Fox, born Wilhelm Fried, um, started Fox, and it merged, of course, with 20th Century Pictures and became 20th Century Fox. He helped make the newsreel uh, a part of the culture of the time. Super important for helping people understand what was going on, giving people some of the first visuals ever of wars and current events. And of course, the theaters, the Fox theaters, every city had a Fox theater in America. And it was a way for like people who lived in Bakersfield. There's still a Fox theater in Bakersfield. It gave people a chance if they didn't live in Los Angeles or Philadelphia. It gave them a chance to have a big theater and feel important. And here's the Warner Brothers, who helped not only start a studio and really went out on a limb to try to get synchronized sound because people weren't sure whether it was going to do well enough or whether people would adapt to having sound that wasn't there wasn't a guy anymore that was going to sit there and play on an organ or piano. But yeah, this was what Warner Brothers did. They ended up kind of having some big fights amongst the brothers, but yeah, those brothers were pretty important for the beginning of what we would come to take for granted in Hollywood. And of course, these guys, Louis Mayer and Samuel Goldwyn, whose company together became Metro Goldwyn Mayer. Literally, guys born in the late 1800s who came here as young kids. Louis Mayer, you see, worked in scrap metal. Samuel Goldwyn, again, also came here as a kid with nothing. And they became multimillionaires, multimillionaires, very successful. And they're not the end because you've got people like this. Well, one of them, of course, is Harry Cohn, who was also a studio head. So Harry Cohn definitely goes in with the studio heads that we previously read. But his big thing was a partnership he had with Frank Capra. The movies that he helped create became defining movies of American cinema. Helped establish again what is going to be Americans, the way Americans are going to make movies. But these two guys here, the last two, were producers who were just so important as producers that even though they didn't own the studios, they were very, very important for everything that we know today. David O. Selznick and Irving Thalberg. And the Academy continues to every year give out a Irving Thalberg Memorial Award for people who are, major forces in Hollywood. David O. Selznick made Gone with the Wind. I mean, this is when people talk about the 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 Jewish Hollywood. They were all Jewish. They were all Jewish. Again, not as many of the actors at the time were, though you did have, you know, people like Paul Mooney. But the story in this period was not the actors, because in many cases, the actors who were there were actors who did not accentuate their Jewish identity. Look, Paul Mooney, Frederick Michelle Meyer Weisenfreund. That's not going on a marquee. The studio heads, if they had a Jewish actor, most likely that Jewish actor was not going by their Jewish name, their birth name, their Yiddish name, whatever their name was. They weren't going to be known by those names. These guys weren't known by their names. Many of them, like you saw, Geldfish became Goldwyn. So a lot of these people were not going to use their their birth names. Too Jewish. Now, when we talk about this period during the 1920s and the fact that these Jewish studio heads, many of them who very quickly, with, I mean, untold, I mean, it was a lot of guts. It took a lot of courage to do some of these things. But many of these, well, all of those people I just mentioned became super wealthy. And what was amazing is that their wealth continued to accumulate even during the Depression. Even during the Depression, something amazing happened, which was that people still went to the movies. In some cases, that was their respite. That was their one escape from losing a job, losing a house, losing a farm, was going to the movies. And so these people continued to earn money, a lot of money. But you know what? With that money, something else, which you could make the argument made it even harder, was that during this period, the level of discrimination that went on in our area in Southern California was insane. So, look, this is part of the story. And I want to make it clear that this is not an excuse, and this is not to let these Jewish studio heads off the hook. But the fact that they changed the names of their Jewish actors, the fact that they wouldn't tell Jewish stories, was not based on some theoretical question of whether Jews would be accepted or not. They knew they weren't accepted. These people that were earning crazy amounts of money, were literally told by their neighbors, we don't want you to live here. And more importantly, you want to go to our golf club? You're not coming to our golf club. It's not open to you.
So they built HelloFresh.
Well, they did their own. And of course, that's the story. But what's amazing is, look, the Jonathan Club let their first Jew in 1977. LA Country Club, 1977. The California Club downtown, 1976. This wasn't just the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and after World War II, where people saw how anti Semitism isn't just, we don't want Jews in our country club. It definitely changed, and it's been talked about. Overt anti Semitism became less conspicuous after World War II, but it didn't go away because Jews weren't allowed to enter as members the LA Country Club for 30 more years after the end of World War II. The first Jew that was, I knew the first Jewish guy that was in the LA Country Club was Cheryl Corwin. Sherry Corwin was the head of Metropolitan Theaters. Um, the first guy that got into the California Club was Harold Brown, who was the Secretary of Defense for Carter, whose head literally left the presidency of Caltech to be the Secretary of Defense. He was allowed to enter the Jonathan Club just before he finished his presidency of Caltech University. I mean, this was in the 70s. So yes, as as Philip just said, we created our own. We made our own. We made Hillcrest Country Club. We made our own country club. We made our own place to play golf. Though our own place that we could we could feel important at, have
My
meetings.
law, my law school, Loyola, Jews, Catholics.
Yeah, but you understand that like in the 20s and 30s, the issue was like UCLA wasn't letting Jews in. I mean, look, we also need to talk about something really serious, which was we created our own hospital, right? Cedars of Lebanon and Mount Sinai Hospital were created by Jews because we couldn't get into a hospital for we could I mean, do you understand that Jewish doctors were not I mean, you take for granted that people wanted Jewish doctors. They couldn't I mean, we had to start our own hospital. And guess what? It's one of the best hospitals in Los Angeles. So yeah, we created our own. In 61, Cedars and Mount Sinai merged to create Cedar Sinai. And yeah, still a mezuzah on every door. There's still a big Jewish star over the hospital. But it's not a Jewish hospital because there's a bunch of Jewish doctors there that started it. They started it because they weren't allowed to go into another hospital to practice. We created parallel institutions not because we wanted to, but because we had to. One of my one of my favorite parallel institutions unfortunately closed down a few years ago, but in 1938 out in Inglewood, a bunch of Jews who couldn't get turf club privileges at Santa Anita created Hollywood Park. The Warner Brothers, I mean, so happened that the Goldwins, Daryl Zanuck, uh, Walt Disney was an early, interestingly, was an original shareholder of Hollywood Park too, which is one of the reasons why people have argued over whether he was really anti-Semitic or not, because he was part of the Jewish race club. Uh, but Hollywood Park, wasn't just another place to watch horses. I mean, you got to go back in time a little bit, but back in the 40s and 50s, that's where people hung out. I mean, Jack Benny would be at Hollywood Park. Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz, owned horses there. I mean, if you wanted to see celebrities, that was Cary Grant was there all the time. They had a Cary Grant pavilion. So Hollywood Park wasn't just built by Hollywood producers. It was built because they couldn't own a horse at Santa Anita, but they created something special. They created a place that, literally Jimmy Stewart, Mickey Rooney, Burns and Allen, they'd be walking around Hollywood Park because that was their place. Created a great alternative. But I mean, it was created out of anti Semitism. It was created by us because they didn't want us. You know, the the most famous country club story that again, it's an anecdote. Some people question whether it really happened. The woman who was at the center of the story claims it really happened, so I'll take her at her word. But one of the greatest stories, of course, was that Groucho Marx brought his daughter Melinda to a exclusive clubhouse, one of these country clubs, and the club official, when Melinda went into the pool, they told her she couldn't use the pool because she was Jewish. And Groucho said to the guy, "Well, she's only half Jewish. Can she only go up to her waist?" So that was the the Groucho Marx story. But Melinda says it really happened, and Melinda says that Groucho ended up writing the club president about how offensive it was. But
Yeah,
some people say it's
Rabbi,
just a Groucho Marx story. Can she go up just to her waist?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
there's a great line in the Albert Brooks. He did a riff on that line from Groucho in the Albert Brooks movie, Trying to Find Comedy in the Muslim World. There's a scene
Yes.
where he's interviewing for an assistant, And the assistant, who's a Muslim woman and dressed that way, looks at him and she says accusingly, "Are you a Jew?" And he says, "Well, yes, but only part-time."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the the yeah, there's a lot of jokes off of this, but I mean, there's something that's so crazily, it just literally the Jewish people create, okay, there was also an aerospace industry, which, by the way, a lot of Jews were involved with as well. But the two businesses that Los Angeles was completely dependent on was Hollywood and aerospace industry, and we helped develop one of those almost completely, and and yet we're not allowed to participate in the official institutions of the community. It's unbelievable. And so, yeah, the studio heads decided, maybe it's a better idea for us to create characters and to focus on stories that are going to be acceptable to the masses. And let's not make things that are really Jewish. So the need to kind of assimilate and to pass, I think, became the major, if you want to say, what how did Jews confront this? They confronted it by avoiding it. At a certain point, you know, people had to do something. And really it really didn't start in Hollywood until the war, until really, look, when Chaplin made The Great Dictator, it was 1940. Technically, the United States was still neutral. The United States hadn't entered the war. But Charlie Chaplin was, as you know, pretty political and didn't care. He also wasn't Jewish. He talked about an affinity with the Jewish people. He talked about how much he admired the Jewish people. In some cases, he even said, reportedly, he said he wished he was Jewish, but he wasn't. And he 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 produced a movie that mocked Hitler and that kind of exposed what the world was allowing to happen. And after the war, while people understood that the Holocaust was devastating, it still, the United States really was only starting to confront um, anti-Semitism, and really the groundbreaking movie that kind of addressed that was Gentleman's Agreement, which came out in '47, and of course starred Gregory Peck. It won an Academy Award for Best Picture. It was very well received, and it told the story of how anti-Semitism, again, it's a story of a journalist pretending to be Jewish to expose anti-Semitism, and it really was a one of Hollywood's first serious attempts at confronting anti-Semitism and confronting hatred. And out of the Holocaust, you can make the argument that's how Hollywood started, making movies that were going to confront, at least at the surface of something, anti-Semitism and Jewish issues. And bear with me because right now we're still talking about film. But movies like The Diary of Anne Frank, Judgment at Nuremberg came out in '61, Pawnbroker came out in '64. And that was like really a serious movie because it talked about the psychological trauma. It didn't just kind of objectify, like, you know, the loss in a kind of in a in a like a global way. It got into what, like, how one person is dealing with PTSD, and it's a very powerful movie, The Pawnbroker. If you haven't seen it or haven't seen it in a while, um, it really was the first, I think, in a way to kind of not just kind of tell it in a sterile way. Not that Diary of Anne Frank wasn't serious, but it 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 sanitized it a little bit, I think. But Pawnbroker, no. And then, you know, the 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 television show, The Holocaust, really opened it up and told a story with Jewish families on television. But we're going to get to television in a moment because I would make the argument it's really television that opens up Jews being Jewish on film and in television, and it really starts with TV. So, um, before we make that transition, before we establish that next part of this story, which I guess is kind of the when the story starts to get a little bit more hopeful. But before we move there, again, I, I hope you understand my point that when we talk about Jews establishing and creating Hollywood, it's an amazing story. It is a story of immigrants building an industry. But I don't know of any story that's more tragic than a people that build an industry, but to some extent can't reap the benefits of it in front of everybody. And the amazing thing is they're telling stories. So tell that story. Tell that story. And so it's crazy in a way that this amazing story, to some extent, I mean, there's some movies and documentaries that have touched on it, but it's a crazy story. I mean, if somebody did a mini series about the studio heads and the anti-Semitism that they dealt with, maybe it's not a bad time for us to do that because we might have come back around. I'm going to get to that probably next week, which is we're in another inflection point for Jews in the media and in television and movies. There's no question.
Hey, Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
the women's club, because I listened to it with Glory, maybe 6 months ago, a year ago, and everybody on this would love this book. It's called Hitler in Los Angeles by Stephen Ross. I
Mm.
don't know if you've read it or not, and it's about an attorney and his spy network uncovered and thwarted Nazi plots to kill Hollywood figures, and this was back in the 30s,
A
Yeah.
great book.
40s.
It's a great book. It's a great book.
Up
It's
up until Pearl Harbor, the Jewish studio heads were treading very carefully on movies that might be critical of Germany because the movies had wide distribution in Germany. And they
That's true. That's true too, Philip. There was business decisions that were made based on alienating a market. That is true. Up through we're talking about that period. You're talking about that period from 33 to 41 before we went into the war. Once we went into the war, though, I will say this: the Jewish studio heads, when they were enlisted by Hollywood to make propaganda films and to do what they needed to do to help defeat the Nazis, they did not hold back at all. They definitely showed their passion and their energy to do everything they could to to defeat the Nazis. So I
I,
will say that both things are important to say that they were probably at first a little too hesitant to alienate their market, uh, which by the way was crazy because Goebbels and all the Nazis were basically telling people don't go to American films. They're all made by Jews. They're all going to make you soft. They're going to make you Jewish or sympathetic to Jews. But at the same time, they were making movies that everyone had to see. I mean, everyone wanted to see Gone with the Wind. It didn't matter where you lived. They all wanted to see Gone with the Wind. So yeah, it's a good point, but you need to make the other point, which is that the Jews devoted themselves wholeheartedly to make the films that would inspire America and to make people feel good about the sacrifices that we had to make, which were tremendous during World War II.
but interestingly, the propaganda movies, if you want to call them that the Jewish studios made depicted the Japanese in some of the most racist ways
Okay,
possible,
okay.
including the cartoons that were done. I mean, they
There
were
is
bad.
I know there's no question that there was a lack of racial sensitivity. Yes, absolutely. I actually, I made this point a few years ago when I did a sermon about Jew face and high holidays. I mean, Paul Mooney was had to play a Chinese man in The Good Earth. I mean, they couldn't let Asian. I mean, it wasn't the Jewish studio heads only that made this decision. It was Washington. It was a national policy that Asians couldn't you couldn't have Asians kissing each other on screen. But uh, yeah, some weird laws that we had to deal with. So when we think about some of those images, it was yeah, it was not it was part of a bigger issue. But yes, and again, that's not excusing that it's just that those were a fact. Those were a fact. And some of those cartoons were done by Walt Disney, who was not Jewish. Anyways, any other comments or questions? Again, these initial studio heads, some of them um, married people who were not Jewish, and then kind of their families weren't Jewish anymore, anyways. Some of them, like Carl Lemley, I mean, some of them did remain Jewish, um, but a lot of these Jewish folks were born and died Jewish. They did not, as they might have done in Europe, have to convert in order to be accepted by society. They weren't accepted by society, but they built their own institutions. And of course, one of those institutions was, of course, Wilshire Boulevard Temple, which became an amazing testament to American success. It's a beautiful synagogue. And Louis Mayer and the Warner Brothers and all the people that were members there patronized and supported the synagogue. They didn't necessarily always go, but they did send money and they did support the synagogue. And of course, they built a beautiful cemetery, Home of Peace, which is the cemetery that Wilshire Boulevard controlled. It's down in East LA. It's not necessarily an area where people go to a lot, but it's the 710 and 5 junction. It's where my dad is buried. He wanted to be buried there because he loves the old Hollywood stuff. So he's just a few feet away from the Warner Brothers, and he's a few feet away from the Lemleys and the Mayors, and I think the Three Stooges are in that cemetery. Anyways, it's an amazing, like, you walk around there and it's like, oh yeah, that's that studio head and that's that studio. They were all buried at this Jewish cemetery in down by, it's not far from Commerce. Anyways, the story of those people is a story which I think, could probably be told in a kind of a Boardwalk Empire or some kind of a, if it's done by a really great director. I think it's a compelling story. It's not always going to make us feel good about some of these Jewish studio heads, but it's an interesting, compelling story. So, moving into what changes, and it's not so much just what changes, but television, I would make the argument, changes the story to some extent, because television, which again really starts to take off in the 50s and 60s, helps create an alternative form of storytelling. And of course, for a long time, it was the secondary form of storytelling, right? For a long time, and you know this, I mean, you've heard these discussions up until maybe 10, 15 years ago, film actors did not do television. You didn't do television unless your career hit the skids. There was film and there was television. And the interesting thing is that the Jewish the Jewish contribution to television was less a function of the business as it was in Hollywood, but really in the talent and in the creation of the stories and in the actor and in the acting and the visibility. So it was a little different. It was almost reverse of Hollywood, where television allowed Jews to write Jewish stories, very Jewish stories, and also allowed um, Jewish actors to start acting a little Jewish. Let's just say they're acting a little Jewish. And by that, of course, I'm gonna say one of the most important contributions to television was was what happened at the Show of Shows is with Sid Caesar. The people that were involved in creating that show, and a lot of you know, was Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks, uh, you know, uh, there's so many people that were involved in the early television shows that broke ground, not just because you had a guy like Sid Caesar who would sometimes, do a whole sketch in Yiddish, but the people that wrote the sketches were all Jewish and were filled with Jewish references and Jewish timing that we knew was Jewish. And it really created, especially when it came to humor, it created it created something on television that was was groundbreaking for us as Jews, which is we're gonna have Jews on screen. And what was interesting is that before you know it, the Jews that were there on screen on the little screen on your television, again, we're talking about Jack Benny, George Burns, Sid Caesar, uh, you know, people who were not even necessarily acting, but were doing the talk show circuit, and so they became huge. Was a Don Rickles or Joan Rivers, that those people made people see Jews, and again, a lot of it's due to comedy, as well. I think he's funny. I think that guy's funny or that woman's funny. They make me laugh. And I would make the argument that these Jewish comedians, and again, one of the most important people that never really gets enough attention because I mean, by the end of his career, he wasn't that big. Was Sid Caesar, because he found these people. He identified talent that was really really big, and and they helped make Jews part of the American experience on television, which I would then argue translates back to movies. So again, it's partly based on Jewish comedy, or largely based on Jewish comedy, but it's based on these kinds of tropes that we all know, that the Jews, that the Jewish people are outsiders, that the comedy often comes from arguments or misunderstandings that um, are, they're not. You don't have to be Jewish to understand it, but if you're Jewish, like that's the way we are. Like everything that we laugh about almost is a misunderstanding, right? The absurdity of you saying something and you didn't hear the whole thing because you're, whatever. Those kind of things. And again, that was the centerpiece of a show like Seinfeld, which, is it really a Jewish show? I mean, people argue about it all the time, but I would say it is. I mean, I would say that the trope, the melody, the discussion on that show is so vitally Jewish that we all knew what was going on. We all knew it was a Jewish show. So those kinds of comedic elements became, suffused all of comedy to some extent. It no longer was just Jews doing it, because then you had an African American family doing it or an Asian family doing it, but they were all doing Jewish. They were all doing the Jewish shtick to some extent. Look, it's another thing that we don't really talk about because we really don't know how to place it. Like, how do we, like, where do you see this? Um, how do you identify, like, where does it come from? Like, where is there a place where because you're Jewish, this is you can make a joke like this? What's interesting, of course, is that you have weird plays on this, which like, think about it. On Seinfeld, the Larry David character, the character that is Larry David, that's played by Jason Alexander, the name is George Costanza. And of course, we learn later on that his dad's Italian, his mother's Jewish. And that's part of the, one of several of the stories. But like it's Larry David. I mean, Larry David is Jewish. I mean, as we now know from Curb Your Enthusiasm, it's not like he's a little Jewish, right? So it's interesting that sometimes we still like played around with it. But look, one of the most famous characters that was Jewish on sitcoms was, anybody want to get, I'll give you a clue. It's a woman. It's a woman. She was Jewish on this show. And everybody thought she was Jewish. She was not Jewish, but she played a Jewish woman, but she played her so well that people just thought she was Jewish. Anybody?
She played Rhoda.
I was thinking Rhoda.
Yes, Rhoda.
I thought it was the Golden Girls.
No.
No.
Valerie Harper. Valerie Harper was not Jewish.
No.
She oftentimes played Jewish. She actually was on a wonderful set of comedy albums, including You Don't Have to Be Jewish, where where she does Jewish over and over again, Jewish sketches. When You're in Love, the Whole World is Jewish. It was a great set of comedy stuff, that was comedy records. But yeah, Rhoda Morgenstern was a Jewish character played by an Italian woman. Didn't matter. Everybody, I mean, it by that point, a Jewish character was it was good enough that it didn't matter who played her because the character was Jewish. We have to have that character being Jewish. I don't know if I don't know if that moment was a watershed moment for Jews in television or Jews in media, but it's definitely up there.
Well,
That's definitely up there.
Rachel, the woman who plays the lead in the streaming series, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel,
Maisel, yeah,
but was not Jewish either,
yeah.
but she played
Rachel Brosnahan. Yeah, it's
a Jew.
yeah. By this point, it's almost like, yeah, we've seen it so many times. We've seen this, is she Jewish? Does it matter? I mean, we by now, but when that came out, to have a character where it was vital that Rhoda was Jewish, but it wasn't played by a Jewish person, because it didn't matter because Jews were playing other characters and it was just back and forth. But to have the character be so Jewish was amazing in a way. And that we can establish that. Now, I will tell you this. What's so interesting about this, and again, look, I think about this a lot because of 20 years ago now, my dad created JLTV, Jewish Life Television, and he just wanted to have a Jewish channel. He didn't really think about the consequences. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know what it would be, but he just said, we deserve a channel. And then there was a question of, what do you put on the channel? And so it turned out we needed a lot of stuff. And yeah, 20 years ago we got on DirecTV, and he had to do something. And so he had to put on programs. And again, some of the programs that we run are not fantastic, but part of what he had to do was fill time. And so one of the things he did is he acquired shows like Jack Benny or Groucho Marx. And we also do Soupy Sales, which, now some of this is just the guy was Jewish, right? It wasn't anything other than that. The least Jewish, you can make the argument that we've been running for a while, has been Bonanza. That's Jewish because of Lauren Green and Michael Landon. There's nothing. They had one Jewish episode where they had a Jewish migrant family, that they help protect. But other than that, I mean, it's not a Jewish show, but there were Jews on the show. And again, Jack Benny I would say he was one of the least Jewish comedians. I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't funny. I'm just saying he didn't rely on a lot of Jewish shtick. But one of the things that we've been running since 2009 on JLTV is arguably one of the most important and unrecognized television shows that helped introduce America to Jewish families. And
I
that's
dis
the
I
what?
disagree with you about Jack
What?
Benny. He was
Why?
always so parsimonious, always cheap. That was a shtick that he
Uh,
did, and that
I,
it definitely is a stereotype.
okay, it's a stereotype, but he didn't. I mean, I would say that there are people who are Scottish or who are Dutch or whatever who would say, well, our people are cheap too, and he's just like my uncle. I think Jack Benny delivered his delivery maybe was maybe the least Jewish, the least New York, the least ethnic, I would say. Maybe that's the right word. But I'm just saying, look, it's not I'm not saying he wasn't. It's not like he denied he was Jewish, but of the people that were out there, and I'm talking about Mel Brooks, Don Rickles, I'm talking about guys who were so obviously New York and obviously Jewish. But I would just say again, I'm comparing them to other Jewish comedians. But the show that again, 2009, we've been running it, is the show that helped create, I think, uh, an appreciation of Jewish families, at least that they're Jewish and they do Jewish things and they have Jewish holidays, but they're American, and that is the Goldbergs, the original Goldbergs. Now, what's interesting about the Goldbergs is that it was a radio show, right? It was a very popular radio show, started in 29, right? So you're talking about like right while Europe is becoming more and more fascist, more and more, dark in some ways. Jews are uh, being portrayed on a weekly radio show, very popular as ordinary Americans. They're an immigrant family. They're like an Italian family. They're like this kind of family, but they're Jewish. And she spoke with an accent, and they brought Jews into people's homes all around the country. Didn't matter whether you lived in Iowa or you lived in Kentucky. You heard the Goldbergs, and of course that show made the transition to television in 1949. Was one of the first shows, uh, comedies. It was one of the first. I got to tell you something. It was one of the first really family-based sitcoms. So it wasn't really only because of its Jewish content, but it really also helped open up. I mean, you can make a straight line from the Goldbergs to the Cosby Show, which is, hey, these people are different race, different religion, but they're just like us. And I think it had a really, really powerful effect on us. Of course, they did a new version of it, right? They came out with a new version of the Goldbergs, which did okay. I mean, you have to say, I mean, the show was on for several seasons, and it's not easy to do. But the original show wasn't only groundbreaking because it was about Jews, it was showing that Jews are like everybody else, took place in the Bronx, in a Jewish area of the Grand Concourse area, it was on Tremont. The Goldbergs was created by a Jewish woman. This was a show that was Gertrude Berg literally created these characters and made this show. And so she was really also, Gertrude Berg, a pioneer for women in media. And so she created this show, and for the most part, she didn't talk about politics. She didn't want to upset people. She wanted people to she didn't want to rock the boat, so to speak. She said, I keep things average. I don't want to lose friends. She won an Emmy Award for her role as Molly Goldberg in 1950, and she was on television for 10 years. Now, the story of the Goldbergs is also a very interesting story because as that show was running, and we're talking about at a time when there were three channels, it ran on CBS. Some of you might know this, but I have a feeling that some of you don't know this. The man who played her husband was an actor named Philip Loeb. And Philip Loeb ended up becoming blacklisted. And we can't talk about Jews in Hollywood without talking a little bit about the blacklist. Well, Philip Loeb was blacklisted. The studio told CBS told Gertrude, "You got to get rid of him." She said, "No, I'm not getting rid of him." But General Foods pulled their sponsorship, and CBS dropped the show, and she gave in. She recast her husband. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, right? But you know what she did? She continued to pay Loeb's salary. Yeah. That is what, yeah, that's what a hero does. So she was able to keep the show on, and eventually the show ran its course. It was off, and she ended up continuing to do a little work. She was always going to be Mrs. Goldberg. And yeah, you can watch the show. If you haven't seen the original, you can watch it on the network. Look, is it a great show? Is it the kind of television that holds up? I don't know, but it's really important. It's really groundbreaking, and it helped, I think, more than anything, bring average, ordinary Jewish family into people's homes and help make other people understand that Jews are just like everybody else. We all want to do well in this country. We all want our kids to succeed. We want to be good neighbors. We want to be friends with our neighbors. And it really was an important show that people don't talk about. Again, was it groundbreaking television? I don't know, but it was really, really important. And I think, again, it's one of those shows that we don't talk about, but on so many levels was important. Her, the what Gertrude Berg did, what it did to help tell family stories is pretty important. So, anyways, um, that is part of how television helped integrate Jews into people's consciousness as people, not just, we're gonna show you Jews. And um and that's why I said television really is that vital place where Jews in the media start to be comfortable being Jewish. And as let's face it, in the 60s and 70s, when Jews no longer, in some cases, again, we said it was the late 70s that some Jews got into these country clubs, there's a different reality. And for the last 50 years or so, Jews have said, hey, we're not dealing with the same kinds of overt and covert anti-Semitism, though we can make the argument, is that going to stay? But a lot of it has to do with again, what television did and what Jewish comedians did. So again, some people said, are we going to do something about Jewish comedy? Well, I would make the argument that Jewish comedy, especially through Jewish television, is what helps tell and make how we tell Jewish stories, how we convey Judaism. And Jewish comedy to some extent is American comedy. So you almost can't separate it, because it's not just the sitcom. It's not just um, then what Jews do when they feel comfortable telling those stories, which is what we make a movie like Blazing Saddles. We we make movies like Fiddler on the Roof. We don't we don't hold back anymore, right? By the 70s, we start to tell Jewish stories, and and so we feel comfortable with that. But it's also the Jewish comedian on the Tonight Show. It's also the stand-up comic who is now going to make a transition to uh to a sitcom because everybody wants the next Paul Reiser. They want the next Jerry Seinfeld. They want the next Richard Lewis. Every Jewish comedian got a television show because people wanted those Jewish comedians. And so there's not what about Jews in comedy, because this is the story of American media over the last 50 years. But to talk about, like, how do we separate that from film or television? I mean, you can't. That is film and television. There are definitely areas within comedy where Jews played a vital role. And again, I would make the argument, even though most of the actors, most of the featured performers in the original Saturday Night Live, with the exception of Gilda Radner and Lorraine Newman, are not Jewish. I mean, Lorne Michaels, if you want to see the documentary on Lorne Michaels to understand, like, what is a Jewish comedy mind about, it's Lorne Michaels, who, you know, depending on how you tell the story, was definitely influenced by his Jewish upbringing. They kind of tell a story about how he lived on a kibbutz, or whether that's true or not. But it's again, there's no single explanation for Jewish comedy. There's no single explanation for how it creates so much of what we know in the media, but uh, it definitely is going to be the place where Jews enter people's lives, and now we start to see Jewish people uh, being Jewish on screen and on television. But again, I would make the argument that television was what broke that down. Any questions? Any comments? Any?
I wanted to tell you, there
Yeah.
was some of you will remember Will and Grace, and Deborah Messing on one of the shows was comforting one of the attorneys or one of the friends, one of his gay friends, and she starts singing like it's a lullaby. She starts singing Manish Tana, and I
Yeah.
thought, wow, will the audience get it? And I realized a lot of people who aren't Jewish have attended,
The
seders,
theater. Yeah.
and we like to do that. I mean, I do. I think it's
Yeah.
important. Just as I will attend certain events with, Christian
Yeah.
friends of mine.
I'm kind of
Yeah.
dovetailing that. My question to you, Rabbi, is in Blazing Saddles, do you think Mel Brooks thought, well, the non-Jewish audience would get some of these more inside Jewish jokes and references that are in the movie? Do you think he figured it's been so much time now has taken place that they'll get it? Because there's some things in that movie that are very Jewish, and,
Yeah,
and
I would ask. It's a good question. I would like to ask him that. Thankfully, he's still alive, right? We could ask him. Yeah. So so I would say it's a great question, because what is, like, when Mel Brooks himself, as and again, remember, he plays a couple roles in that movie, but him as the Indian chief,
right, right.
screams out "Lazem gain," right, which is Yiddish for "let them go." Lazem gain, right? How I First of all, do people know? Does he care? Does he care whether people know what he says? Do they care that it's Yiddish? How many people know it's Yiddish? Like, you have to wonder, again, which you asked the question, it's a fair question, is does he care? Does he want everybody in on that joke, or does he just he said it because it made him laugh? You don't know. And it's a fair question to ask, because you can't you can't possibly say everybody who saw that knew that that was Yiddish. There's just no way. I don't think I don't. He's a smart guy. I don't think he thought everyone was gonna
No,
know that what he
but
said in
but
Yiddish.
but the scene was interesting because he plays the Indian chief, and they're going to attack the
Yeah,
wagon train, but
Yeah,
he says, well, we'll let the black guys
go.
go.
Well, you're right, but that's also a statement about Jewish civil rights, right? That's a statement which he's making obviously a meta statement by having Cleavon Little in the movie, which is we're going to tell a story where the hero is an African American who is going to going to save the village. I mean, that's the whole story, right? So, yeah, there's the idea that a cow that a Indian speaking in Yiddish is going to let the the black family go is hysterical because it is saying, look at how we protected them as an Indian. I mean, it's just a whole funny thing. But yeah, I'd like to know whether he thought that anyone was going to get it.
Is that when he yells Schwarzers?
Yes,
Yeah.
but again, it's clearly not meant in a negative way because again,
No.
he's making a joke about
You know,
white
something
anti-Semitism.
something I just thought of tonight that, and this is movie in 1968, 69, the first interracial kiss on television was between a male Jewish actor and a black female actress.
Yeah, you're talking about
Star Trek.
yeah, William Shatner and Uhuru.
And Michelle Nichols.
Yeah. Yeah, I should have said Nichelle Nichols instead of her casted name. But
Which, by
yes,
the way, when CBS told they had to preview it, and so they preview it, and I think many or all stations in the South refused to air the episode.
yeah, yeah. No, I don't know if that was a Jewish. I mean, I think that was probably not William Shatner's like overriding decision. It's probably Gene Roddenberry to say I'm doing it anyways. But I mean, I don't care. We're going to run it even if the people don't show it. But yeah, I mean it is it's an interesting. But I didn't want to spend too much time talking about all the Jewish actors and actresses. And again, you can listen to the Adam Sandler song to go over it all. And again, you know, we talked about Barbara Streisand, before about when we talked about music, but again, arguably, it's on film that she really became a star and that she became, not just an actress, but a director and a producer of vitally Jewish movies like Yentl, right? And was always playing Jewish characters, unabashedly Jewish characters, right? But yeah, the point was not to go through every Jewish actor and who's not a Jewish actor and whatever. But I do want to just make the point too that I thought it was interesting. Uh, uh, Bob, where's Bob? He's up there. Bob, you're muted, but you shared with me that your cousin, right? It was a cousin.
My cousin. Was my cousin's cousin.
Howard Zeef, who was a very, very well-known comedy director, who directed movies like Private Benjamin and Main Event, which was with, if you recall, was with Barbara Streisand. That was Barbara Streisand and Ryan O'Neal, right?
Yeah.
But he was really great at directing comedies and had that kind of timing and was part of the Jewish a lot of Jewish directors who specifically went into comedy and worked with some really funny women like Goldie Hawn and Barbara Streisand. But it was also using, I would make the argument, both Main Event and more famously Private Benjamin, which was using Jewish stereotypes for women and kind of turning them on their head a little bit, right? There was a little bit of, oh, we're going to use the stereotype, but we're going to play with it and we're going to give you something that you didn't expect, which is, of course, is the end that Private Benjamin is a tough woman, right? It's not, well, we have to use the stereotype that she starts off as a Jap, as Jappy, but we're going to make her, we're going to show you that that's a stupid, unidimensional whatever. That's not real. So yeah, I mean, I would say it's a really cool thing. But I didn't know that much about him. I learned a little bit about him after Bob told me that it was his cousin. But one of the things that he did, I want to share with you, which wasn't necessarily related to television, but for those who remember this campaign, he was the photographer who made the Levy's Jewish Rye ads, which was an amazing campaign that was created by DDB. Esther and Alan were very involved in the advertising world. Will tell you these these became iconic. These became an iconic campaign, and it worked off of the stereotype of like, well, these people aren't Jewish. Today, that wouldn't be funny, right? Because we know Black Jews and we know Asian Jews and we know Native American Jews. So, you know, I have Jewish friends that look like all these people, so it doesn't work as well today. But yeah, Howard Zeef was the photographer on this Levy's ad campaign, which at its time was I think kind of cute. Maybe it's not politically correct today, but I think it was a really great I think it was a really it was a really great campaign in its day. So thank you for sharing that about your cousin. But again, it's another example of somebody who in Hollywood is one of so many great directors and people who again there's so many of them who challenged our perceptions of identity, who kind of you know help tell stories where Jews, if they're not the hero, they and again, is Private Benjamin a hero? Well, she shows that don't think that people who are raised in privilege can't get tough. So I think that there's something. I think that there's something that was that was powerful in those stories. I'm going to we're going to wrap it up in a second because I don't want to get into the second part of this, which is really talking about those um the transition from okay, we got to Jews being on film, we got to Mel Brooks going Lazem Gain, but how do we get from Lazem Gain? And we also talked about Yentl. I just mentioned Yentl came out in 1983, but how do we get to shows today like Fauda, and I would make the argument um, look, I want to be very careful. I'm not endorsing these shows as the greatest shows. Just like I said, I'm not sure the Goldbergs is something you're going to watch and go, wow, this is a great show. But so let me just say, you can like the show or not like these shows that I mentioned, but let's understand that these are very Jewish stories, transparent about a Jewish man, Jeffrey Tambor, becoming a woman, right, in front of his family. Nobody Wants This, which is in the middle of its run right now, which is about interfaith relationships, even a rabbi now being in an interfaith relationship. Um, and again, I would argue that The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is not going to be made in the 70s. Not that again you have Rhoda Morgenstern, but there's a big difference between the Rhoda Morgenstern and the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Now I will also tell you, Philip, you brought it up, the fact that Rachel Brosnahan is not Jewish, but everybody else, well, not everybody else. Tony Shalhoub is not Jewish; he's Arab, but the mothers are both of the mothers are Jewish actresses. Uh, um, um, her manager Bornstein is Jewish. She actually Alex Bornstein was in my carpool when I was a kid going to Heschel. She was in my car. She was in my carpool. She was different even back then when she was about 8 years old. She was making noises and like you'd be like, what's wrong with her? But she ended up becoming pretty famous, Alex. But yeah, how do we get to these stories today? And I would argue again, one of the most, it's not always been, and it's gone back and forth, and some seasons are, but I mean, Curb Your Enthusiasm, I don't know how somebody who isn't Jewish. You talk about one line in or a few scenes in in Blazing Saddles, but how do we get to episodes and multiple episodes like season 11 of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which if you're not Jewish, I don't understand how you would how would you
But actually, I remember discussing this with you when it came on, that even for someone Jewish, I said I wanted to like hide under the table, and you said you thought it was funny, and of course it is
listen,
funny, but
listen. I'm not gonna. I don't want. I want to be
no, I love
careful.
the show. It's fine.
I will tell you when I first saw when my dad first turned me on to Curb, which was like the second or third season. I remember he gave me some DVDs of it. He said, "Son, you got to watch the show." And I started watching. I said, "Dad, this is horrific. This is the worst thing I've. How is this being made? This is the most disgusting character I've ever seen."
But you get used to it.
before I knew it, I was hooked. But again, that's an aesthetic
Yes,
choice.
I know. I'm only
My
kidding.
my point is only not to endorse these shows. God forbid somebody says he told everyone to watch Curb. But I will tell you, I just don't understand how people, as much as Philip doesn't understand how people get, how would they get Blazing Saddles? An entire season almost of episodes that are all about Jewish things, like so Jewish that do people do people do people really want this much Jewish stuff? And they clearly did because he's still doing he doesn't need the money and he's still doing his thing.
Rabbi, that Palestinian chicken episode, I don't know whether people who aren't Jewish feel it the same way.
There's no I would
There's
argue
no way. There's no way.
there's no way you can. But that's my point. How do we get to content now that is so deeply Jewish that you wonder, can somebody who's not, again, I understand you could understand it and celebrate it in one place, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about it next week when we talk about how do we get to that? Because we've gotten to it. I don't want to talk too much about it yet, but think about it. I mean, how do people who did almost everything they can to hide their Judaism create an industry where again in episodic television where we're surrounded by Jewish characters and Jewish stories and Jewish idiom and Jewish references that you wonder, like, there's no way people can get it, or if they can get it, they can't get all of it. They can get 60% of it, 70% of it, but they can't get all of it.
Did you
And
see the new commercial that he did, or the new bit he did?
which
Uh,
one?
It was kind of very political, and he comes off as he plays a Jewish mother. I just saw it the other night.
Oh, no, it's part of his new series that he did called Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Larry. It's a new show he did on HBO. He finished it. It's culminated with I think 6 episodes of American history. It was produced with the Obamas, and I would say it was uneven. I would also say it'd be hard for me to endorse it. It does have some Jewish stuff in it. He did one of it's about 3 or 4 skits per episode, and
Okay, I hadn't seen it. I only saw the
one of the
one.
skits is very Jewish, which is a Henry Ford skit where there's like a rabbi who goes around with Henry Ford on his new car, and of course Henry Ford doesn't want a Jew in his car, but it's that's the most Jewish of them. But there are a few of them that
No, I
are
saw the one where
Jewish.
he plays the mother of Jonas Salk.
Jonas Salk, which is very Jewish.
Yes.
But yeah, so there are a few Jewish ones, and then there are some that are not Jewish, but clearly are Jewish, where his character is his annoying character. But I would argue that if you don't like her, I'm just going to tell people this again. If you want to watch it, I'd say even for people who like him, in my opinion, it's uneven. But if you don't like Curb Your Enthusiasm, you will not like this show. If you've already decided you don't like him or don't spend 2 seconds on it because it's very much for people who are in the know of his characters and the people who are in his episodes. You definitely won't get it unless you've watched his stuff. So but we'll talk about like how do we get to that kind of mentality. And again, he was the creative mind. Him and Seinfeld were the creative mind behind the Seinfeld show. that they are maybe part of the important link between these guys who wouldn't tell Jewish stories and then the very Jewish versions of these stories that we get today of telling, just laying it all out there for better or worse. And we can, again, it's not just comedy. It's shows like Unorthodox or Shtisel, which, and again, we'll talk a little bit about the Israeli contribution to this discussion because we have Israeli shows that I think are inherently Israeli, and then we have American versions of those things like Homeland, which was based on Hatufim, prisoners of war from Israel, or again Fauda, which is all Israeli, or Tehran, which is all Israeli story. But we will get to end in treatment, which was an Israeli television program before it was an American show. So there is an Israeli component to this as well, which we'll look at. So yeah, thank you everybody for being
Can I,
here.
can I interject? One thing?
Yes, please.
Can I interject? Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Drew maybe 4 million viewers.
We're getting a reverb on you.
Okay, Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Drew about 4 million viewers. Seinfeld drew about 75 million. So I think that the Curb Your Enthusiasm is probably a limited audience. And that's why maybe it attracts a certain audience, but not everybody. Yeah, that did.
Yeah, I heard you. I heard you. Oh wait, let me just. Yeah, we were getting the. No, it's not on yours. Hold a second.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
No. Oh, it might be me. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I heard your point, but also, in all fairness, Bob, it's not just a feature of it had a limited audience. Television has changed in the last 30 years. When Seinfeld was on, there were 5 shows on at night. There was no streaming. There was no you can't compare television shows from 35 years ago to what we have today. If you can get 4 million people to watch a show today, it's a huge success. So yes, it's smaller. You need a smaller market, but again, talk about it. It's a much different market. So no one would expect him to get 30 million. Yeah, John.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
How did we get through this whole class without some snippets and some
I'm not gonna deal with that yet. We maybe we'll try next week, but I want to tell you, I do not want to have the mess that we had last. I thought about it. I was going to show you a little bit of the Goldbergs. I was going to show you Mel Brooks going Lazem Gain in Blazing Saddles, even before Philip was on the same page as me with showing those. But yeah, I didn't want to have the same disaster that I had last week playing music, which I looked at and I tried to figure out how it happened. But maybe I upgraded my version of Zoom, so maybe it won't happen. But we'll try it. We'll try it next time. Thank you, everybody, and
thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
I hope you all have a good night.
Rabbi.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye bye.